All right. Good evening. I'm used to saying good morning, but good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time this evening. All right. This is out of pocket. I don't normally do evening shows, but I have a special guest on tonight. Karlyn Borysenko joins me to discuss the militant left. Now, if you're not familiar with her work, then hit the show notes for the links to see a treasure trove of knowledge. But before you do that, she joins us tonight to drop some knowledge. I have questions, many questions. And by the end of this episode, you'll be far wiser and hopefully far more interested in learning more from her. With that said, let's get Karlyn on the show. All right, with the buttons. Karlyn, how are you? Oh, let's get you unmuted here.
Do I have to do that? Oh, I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Okay, I'm
that's a weird quirk in Rumble.
I'm a professional streamer. I know how the internet works. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on the show, DL. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Absolutely. This is going to be fun because I really do actually have a lot of questions. Now, for my audience, if you're not familiar with her, or for your audience that may be in the chat and not familiar with me, we met, I believe, in 2021.
Yeah.
Back at PorkFest up in New Hampshire. And I think my first interaction was sitting in on a talk of yours. I believe it was critical race theory. I think that was the talk. And it was a very enjoyable talk. And then since then, we've just kind of followed each other. And I've been watching you, kind of just pump out this kind of information. So my first question is, you've been joining radical left in-person meetings. You've been doing streams of their streams. How did you get involved in all of this? What got you going to that?
Well, I mean, like with most things, it was like a happy accident, right? And yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about how long we've known each other. And for people in the chat that kind of came from my community, I'll just do like a little bit of the backstory because people might not know this. Like, I was involved in Libertarian Party politics for, a couple of years. I was going to events like PorkFest. I was a delegate at the 2022 Reno convention and all this stuff. And so DL and I met through Libertarian Party politics. And I think he would be the first to say that the Libertarian Party can be a little bit dysfunctional at times. We're not going to name names or anything.
Right.
But I will say that one of the reasons I'm on DL's show tonight is that he is actually one of the most reasonable, kind of like just down to earth, very consistent libertarians that I met in my time, and I just have a whole ton of respect for him. I think he's a really good guy with very strong principles, and he's willing to put his principles ahead of whatever might be convenient at the time, which is not true of very many people in our space. So I've always appreciated that. So how did I get started doing this? Well, so people like, so I mean, like essentially how I ended up in libertarian politics is like I was the whole Democrat that left the left thing in 2020, but I was never really like a conservative. I know I was never really a Republican. I joined the Republican Party for like 5 minutes as a joke, just to troll people essentially, but I
Mhm.
never really considered myself a conservative or a Republican. And so after Biden got basically inaugurated in early 2021, I kind of pieced out from the like conservative party politics, and I was like, okay, I'm kind of done. Like I did my year with you guys. I'm moving on now. And I always considered myself to be like much more like a libertarian, which is how I ended up in like libertarian spaces. But at the same time as I was starting to get involved with the Libertarian Party, I was also doing all these streams on one of my YouTube channels. It's actually a different channel than I use right now, but I would do these streams that I would call happy hour streams,
Mhm.
where it was meant to be a little bit tongue in cheek because we would drink beer and watch DEI trainings. Essentially, that's what we were doing. And we were doing this because I was finding like this was like the golden age of like when critical race theory was starting to make an appearance.
Mhm.
And so I was finding all these diversity trainings, and I come from the world of corporate training. And so I was actually very interested in reverse engineering what was going on in these diversity trainings to try to like figure it out. And so we just started watching a ton of this content, and it kind of became a little bit of an addiction. And then over the course of time, I started going like in all these diversity trainings. One of the things that always stuck out to me, because we weren't watching clips, we were actually watching the whole training, is in all of these trainings they were talking about capitalism. And I was like, these are supposed to be trainings about whiteness and critical race theory and things like that. Why are they talking about capitalism?
Mhm.
And I just started noticing this pattern over and over and over again. And that eventually led me to the radical revolutionary far left, which about a year after I started watching these diversity trainings, I ended up starting to watch socialist videos. And
Mhm.
this was a big revelation for me. And I thought it was just going to be a joke at first. And I thought we were only going to do a couple of them. But once you start watching the real far left, it's like you're watching a real life dystopia emerge right in front of you that you had no idea existed. And I was hooked. And I just started watching as much socialist content as I could. And then eventually I went undercover at my first socialist event. And it was like the biggest mind F in the world
Mhm.
because, like, I remember distinctly that there was a moment, it was like a reproductive justice, like abortion conference. And I found myself in a room, basically surrounded by gender studies majors, and they all looked exactly like you think they do. They had the shaved hair, they had the tattoos, they had the unshaved armpits. There was all sorts of weird gender stuff going on. And I'm sitting there in the middle of this room surrounded by these people, and I almost burst out laughing because I was like, I am in an episode of Socialism Saturday right now. Like, I am in the actual
Right.
training. And it was just like I couldn't get enough of it after that. And so it became an addiction and an obsession, and that's why I do what I do.
That's wild. You know, it's
Mhm,
funny that you mentioned the capitalism bit because before I met you, so I'm on episode what 595 right now.
mhm.
Somewhere around episode 35, I think, if I remember correctly. It might, but it was early. It was early on in my podcast career. For whatever reason, I read Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility.
Oh god, I'm sorry.
And let me make it worse. I promise you, I'm not lying. I read it not once, but I read it twice.
Oh god, bless you.
Because I wanted to make so my thing is I want to make sure that when I deliver something that I am being accurate about it. So I wanted to make very sure because I initially went in reading this thinking I'm going to learn why they think there's so much racism and all this other stuff. And then I was like, individualism, capitalism. What what does that have to do with racism? And then as I kind of dug further just on her stuff alone, my eyes were opened and I was like, "Oh my god, like, people have no idea." Like, that's when I first kind of got this hint that there is this group of people for which it's really about capitalism, individualism, all those kind of things. And then you have, and I hate to say it, but you have your, what do they call them? The, the term for the communist people, the people that support communist ideas and they're dumb.
Useful idiots.
Yeah, the useful idiots.
Yeah.
So then you have like all these useful idiots, and I don't mean that derogatorily necessary, who really believe in the race issues and they're buying into by people that actually don't believe in it. So that was very interesting. But I have not went down the path nearly as much as you have. So, since you've been down this path for years, what is the most surprising thing that you have learned on this journey with the radical left? If you can narrow it down to one thing.
I mean, I think the thing that surprises most people is I think, well, okay, one of the most dystopian things are their views on the nuclear family. I think that a lot of people do know that the left wants to abolish the nuclear family. I don't think a lot of people understand why, but basically really coming to understand that they view children as the property of their parents, as the private property of their parents, and they want to I mean literally eradicate parental rights. They want all children to be raised by the collective in the community. That's a pretty messed up thing. Actually, if you get into some of the clips that I found, I have socialists on videos talking about wanting to get rid of the private kitchen in our households because they want everyone to eat in the communal kitchen, because that way the commune and the other comrades become your family rather than the ones you would eat within your private home. I have socialists on videos talking about growing babies in body bags, like actually doing like cloning, because again, they want to get rid of parental rights. So how do you create children while you grow them through surrogacy? There was also I found this really dystopian story a couple years ago where and this is actually from a real medical journal. They are trying to figure out how to like incubate babies in the bodies of brain dead people, both men and women. And it's just like it really is. It's like socialism is a constant real life dystopian nightmare that it's like you hear them say some of these things and you're like, for real? Like this is actually how they think, but they do think like that.
And so when you tell me this inside, I'm like, the F? Right?
Mhm.
I I wanna believe that there are people, even within the radical left, who some of them are like, "Yeah, these are great ideas," and others are like, "I don't know." Is there a lot of questioning, or are they just all like, "Nope, we're all on board.
Well,
Whatever crazy idea you come up with, we're on board."
I wouldn't say that they all are on board with all the crazy ideas, but
Mhm.
there is no questioning that happens on the left. And that's just actually how the left functions. So the left is very mindful of of basically conflict within their ranks, and how their meetings work is essentially basically everyone gets a turn to go up to the microphone to talk about whatever they want to for 2 to 3 minutes. No one then comes back and questions that person. They don't come and say, you are wrong for reason X, Y, B, and Z. They have to go up to the microphone and say what they want to say, but it's not in terms of creating conflict with the other people. It's in terms of like presenting their case for something. And so I wouldn't say that there's a lot of debate about these ideas as much as there is they put the ideas out there into the universe. No one ever questions them directly. And then it's kind of like whatever ideas bubble up as the ideas that are most interesting to them, those are the ones that end up on the table. And so it is kind of like a different method of communication that I think that people like you and I might be used to.
What draws people to such a crowd? Like, do they get in any way like, are they already familiar with it? Are they what is it that just brings them there and then says, "This is where I belong"?
I'm gonna do a shameless plug right now.
Do it.
I wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto: A Revolutionary Fairy Tale, and this is actually a dystopian fiction book based on the Communist Manifesto.
Mhm.
In that book, I tell the story of a young mother who has a sick child, and she's not making a lot of money, and her child needs medicine or she might die, and the medicine is plentiful, everyone has it, they have it, but they don't have the money to get it. And so who ends up getting the medicine for the child? Well, the socialist revolutionaries that are starting to organize in town. And there's a charismatic leader that's starting to talk about what if we all had access to all of the things, and what if we all just took care of each other? And it all sounds great in principle, right? But it's like for this young mother getting pulled into this socialist cult, they were the ones that showed up with the medicine that saved her daughter. They were the ones that took them in and brought them into the community and gave them food when no one else was giving them food. They were the ones that were friends with them and took care of them and all this stuff. And it is exactly the same thing that happens in the real world. And I've tried to explain this to people. When you are undercover in leftist environments, it's a nice place to be. They treat you really well. They don't judge you. They don't make you feel bad. They are not going to, make fun of you for your
Mhm.
looks or how you talk or anything. You can literally show up as anything in these crowds, and you are going to be accepted, and they're going to listen to what you have to say. And I think for a lot of people, that's very enticing. And that's especially true in this environment where the cost of living for a lot of people is simply like really ridiculous at this point, and people are looking for solutions, and they are the only ones that I think a lot of people see as offering solutions.
Gotcha. Okay. So then let me ask, a lot of times what we hear right now, the rhetoric is the left.
Mhm.
I'm not a big fan of it just because it's too broad for my taste. Um, and it feels like it includes everyone, the radicals, the moderates, and whomever else we may, identify. Is there any danger in not making a distinction, or is that term sufficient for some other reason just to basically include everybody?
Yeah, this is why I constantly say I talk about the far left in America or the radical revolutionary far left because I completely agree with you. And I have on my website, if you go to decodetheleft.com/map, MAP, you'll find my map of the modern left, which is
Mm.
basically a 5-part framework where I say, here's what it means to be a Democrat, here's what it means to be a liberal, here's what it means to be a progressive, here's what it means to be a democratic socialist, and here's what it means to be a revolutionary socialist. Because when you're just talking about the left, that is a huge ecosystem of people, and they do not always get along and they do not always agree with each other. So the people that I track, which is mostly on the democratic socialists and then into the revolutionary socialists,
Mhm.
they hate Democrats and they hate liberals. They tolerate progressives because they think that they can radicalize them more to the far left, but like they do not get along with Democrats and liberals at all. And so if you're just saying the left is a monolith, you're missing out on a lot of nuance because all of these, and even you could go even more in depth in each of these categories and look at how the different groups within those categories behave. And so I try to take a much more nuanced view of it.
Gotcha. So let's focus then in on the what we'll call them the revolutionary left. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can once somebody enters into that element or that wherever, however you want to phrase it, can they be reformed before they end up engaging in any kind of violence? Or is it at that point they're so rooted in their views and goals that it kind of has to play out first?
I mean, can they be? Yes. I mean, I have former members of Antifa in my audience, and it's actually incredibly helpful to have them there because they get to teach people about what they learned when they were actually in Antifa. So, can they be reformed? Yes, absolutely. But it is difficult because I call my show The Cult, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's also not because I actually believe the left is a cult. I believe it's its own ecosystem, and when you get into leftist subcultures, you have to and it's kinda like actually, the libertarians are a lot like this too.
Mhm.
It's like when you get into these subcultures, you only ever talk to other far leftists, you only ever read far left books, you only ever listen to far left podcasts, you only ever go to far left events, and so it's like you are in a self-reinforcing ecosystem
Mhm.
in which everything outside of your ideology is treated as fascist, like literally fascist.
Mhm.
And so I think it is hard for people just like getting indoctrinated into any cult to see their way out of it once they're in it because there is a big price to pay for leaving your cult. You lose all your friends, you lose your social support system. You might lose people, you might not have any other friends that are outside of the cult. And so I think it's a really tough thing to do to wake people up, but I think that's also true of like just many echo chambers.
Right. What kind of things go toward waking people up to say, "Hey, this is not really a good place to be"? What are some of those things that go toward that, just assist it?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm not actually sure about the answer to that because I just haven't gone down that road, to be honest.
Mhm.
Most of what I do, I'm not trying to convince people to leave the left. What I'm trying to do is about to educate people outside of the left about what the far left is doing. But I think once people start getting exposed to like some of the crazier things people do, like a lot of the illegal things that they do, I think that that should be an inflection point, but
Mhm.
even that doesn't seem to work most of the time.
Gotcha. What makes the revolutionary left such a threat?
They want to violently overthrow the United States government. Now, I know that this is a libertarian podcast, and libertarians are also not usually the biggest fan of the United States government. But what you have to understand is they want to overthrow the government and replace it with communism.
Mhm.
So we might like we as libertarians, I'm an anarcho-capitalist at heart.
Mhm.
I kind of joke about being a fascist on the internet, and I'm not opposed to implementing some fascist things in order to stop the left. But in my heart of hearts, if I had my ideal way, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. So I actually don't believe the government should exist, right?
Mhm.
But I don't want to replace it with communism. And so that's that like two different things. And so I think that people should be afraid of them because I really do believe that they are much more organized than people think that they are. I believe they're much further ahead than people think they are. I believe in the next 10 to 15 years, they are going to try to violently overthrow the government. And I think that that's going to throw the entire country into chaos. And I don't think that's going to be good for everyone.
Do you think there's enough? Well, I guess it's kind of, I don't want to ask a question that kind of seems obvious, but there's enough of them to actually make that kind of a valiant attempt?
Yes, there are more of these people than people think, and I know this because we're working on a project right now to try to map out the modern leftist ecosystem,
Mhm.
and this is a nightmare of a project because like let me just describe what happens. When we find one far left organization, we get introduced to 50 more far left organizations, and we go into each of those and we find 50 more far left organizations, and it's like they are all over the place and they span the spectrum from bookstores to like I mean higher education is gone. I also think K through 12 schools are gone. There are so many activist organizations just around the schools. They are publishing books everywhere. There are major publishing organizations. There are major events. There are nonprofits. Right? It's like it's on and on and on and on and on and on and on about the sheer volume of these far left organizations. And so I think the number of people in this movement is higher than we think, and I think it's even higher than they think. And I think the most dangerous thing is they are all fully ideologically committed to this movement. And so it's not like libertarian politics where people talk about these lofty ideas and then everyone starts infighting and bickering and all this stuff and nothing ever really happens and then someone stabs someone in the back and blah 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 whatever. It's not like that on the left. They have a completely different way of communicating with each other and working with each other where they are constantly much better at being organized and focused on the goal and constantly moving the needle forward than any other political group that I've studied.
Is the reason for that because maybe they have a higher baseline of things that they have in common? Because I know, like libertarian, like if we compare it to libertarian politics, you go to any libertarian convention, and virtually anything you say on a microphone is debatable. Somebody will find some reason to. You could say like, "I'm pretty happy right now," and someone will be like, "Well, why were you sitting there scowling 5 minutes ago?" Right? Like it's just it's just like there's this constant need to disagree, and so I feel like maybe in the libertarian world, our commonality is far lower than we like to think it is. Is the commonality in the radical left just that much higher, or is there something else?
No, I think the commonality among the far left is much higher, but you also have to understand that many people on the far left have been indoctrinated to be on the far left since they were little kids. A lot of socialists and communists, they are second or third generation socialist or communists. They were raised by communist parents that were in the same activist ecosystem that they're in now. You also have the problem of the K through 12 public schools, which I think that the K through 12 public schools are captured. I think they've been captured for at least 2 decades, and like I mean, totally captured. They were on their way to it for a long time. And so a lot of the people that you see graduating from college right now, they have only ever been in a school environment where they've been fed far left ideas. They don't know the difference. And then you get into colleges and universities, and it's even worse there. And so I think that we have this ecosystem of people who they literally don't know any differently. They've never been introduced to any political ideas that are not extreme far left political ideas. And so think about that. If you've been raised your entire life and everyone that you've ever been told to trust has told you this is the way the world is and it's corrupt and it's oppressive, and in order to overcome this corrupt oppressive world we need to implement these ideas to overthrow the capitalist system and implement this liberated society. If you've literally been told this your entire life, it's like, how do you even get people to think outside of that mindset? And so I think that that's part of the problem. Like with libertarianism, people come to the Libertarian Party from other places. They might come from the Democrats, they might come from the Republicans, whatever. But when you're a leftist, you have probably been in that ideology your entire life. You haven't come from somewhere else. The most you might come from is being in the Democratic Party and then being radicalized out to the far left, but you're still coming from the left. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm. That's interesting. So in terms of like red states, blue states, is there any difference in the threat between those, or does it just not matter? It just happens to be wherever there happen to be people living, and that's that.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter because you have to understand. So, radical revolutionary socialists, they do not believe in elections. They're not trying to win elections. They want to overthrow the electoral system. And so, they're not gaining their power by getting into elected office. Now, if they have the opportunity to do it, they might do it. But you also have to understand that when we're talking about the real far left, they consider someone like Zoran Mandami to be a traitor to their cause. And I actually have them on video saying this, where Zoran Mandami is not far left enough for them because he's running in an election. And so they view him as a sellout to the capitalist system. So they're trying to work outside of the system by building institutions that are going to allow them to take over the system over time. And so it's a little bit trickier.
Gotcha. And it's interesting because it's funny. Just earlier, like probably an hour ago, uh, I saw a tweet and I was like, oh, I can retweet this video that I made from years ago when the National Education Association, when they decided to take Dr. Seuss out of the annual reading. What was it called? The AR no the reading. I can't remember the drawing a blank. But they have this annual reading program that occurs every single year in honor of Dr. Seuss. Started because of him, and two self-identified critical race theory activists who are in academia, they convinced, or at least they claim they convinced in a paper, the NEA to remove all those books and replace them with something else. So when you say that, these institutions are captured, can you help us identify, or maybe there is no distinction, can you help us identify what I, as a regular, everyday, average person whose kid might be going to public school, what could I go, oh my gosh, that's some radical left stuff. And this is just normal left stuff, if there's even such a thing, or or is it a distinction without difference?
I would make the assumption that if you're getting stuff in school, it's all radical left stuff. I mean, honestly, it's not going to be overt. It's not like they're not going to be like, "Here is the Communist Manifesto, children." It's like they work in these talking points throughout the curriculum, so it's like they're dripping it out through the curriculum. I mean, the best thing people can do is get your kids out of public schools. Honestly, like I think the public school system needs to be abolished. I don't think it's a fixable problem, because think about it. So, what was the first industry that communists took over in America? It was higher education, right? The Frankfurt School came and set up shop at Columbia
Right.
University in the 30s. They took over higher education. What did they get when they took over higher education? They got the colleges of education where they were training the teachers. So we now have a problem where we have literally several decades of teachers that have been trained in these completely captured colleges of education that are training the teachers in order to like put this type of material into the classroom. They don't know how to teach any differently. It's like 90% of the teaching pool is completely corrupted. So even if you have school choice, this is the type of stuff that keeps me up at night. Even if you have universal school choice, you still cannot fix the teaching pool because 90% of those people are just completely influenced by communist ideology that they learned in college. And so, like, how do you even begin to solve that problem? I mean, I think we need to abolish the public schools. I think there needs to be an emphasis on homeschooling, creating small pods. I think there's a lot of great work that many libertarians are doing in this area. And I
Mhm.
think it's the time for people to really take control. And I know a lot of people don't want to homeschool, but like you have to. You are sending your kid to an indoctrination prison.
Gotcha. And so it's far beyond even the rhetoric of, because I know that a lot of libertarians don't necessarily speak of the schools in that particular sense per se.
Mhm.
They'll just say like, oh, it's the Prussian model, so on and so forth. It's an indoctrination camp, and they don't necessarily they don't always specify what they mean by indoctrination. Usually, much of what I've seen tends to be more like, well, they just support big government, and I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't seem to be the worst thing in the world compared to what you just said.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think that's kind of interesting. So let me ask then, the right now, they're on a rampage,
Mhm.
and they seem to have just tasted blood with their current political and social power. What are they doing that's correct? What are they doing that's incorrect?
Are you sure we only have an hour? I might need more time here. Okay, so
We'll
what
go as
is
long as you need. We'll try not to
wow,
be too long, but
yeah.
we need to go more than an hour. That's fine.
I appreciate that. So, I mean, okay, so what is the right doing that's correct? Well, like the good news is they have finally woken up to the fact that the far left is a major problem that will kill them if they don't deal with it. And I think that they got this message loud and clear. And honestly, like I've talked about this. I find it to be very like I love that more people are finding my work now than that
Mhm,
have ever found it because they've finally woken up to the fact that this is a serious threat. I hate that it took Charlie Kirk getting assassinated for that to
mhm,
happen. That legitimately makes me very sad. But it is good that they've woken up. However, they still don't know as much as they think they do about what's going on. And so if you look at Trump's executive orders around Antifa and domestic terrorism, they are not going to work. He hasn't even defined what Antifa is, and they seem to think that Antifa has some big money affluent backer. Antifa doesn't have that. They are funded entirely by mutual aid, small dollar donations that are made in cash or goods or things like that. But there's no George Soros. There's no head of the snake. The far left is a non hierarchical model. And so we know about this because we're libertarians. So we understand a decentralized model and what that is.
mhm.
Antifa is an entirely decentralized model of probably over 1,000 cells all over the country that are kind of loosely affiliated and they might talk to each other, but they're not really working together. And they're all disseminating information to each other through anarchist websites. And that's why they all kind of say the same thing because they're all reading the same anarchist websites. But
Mhm.
you can't cut the head off of the snake of a decentralized model. That is the benefit of a decentralized model. And the right still hasn't kind of like wrapped their head around how do you interact with a non hierarchical, completely self funded anarchist movement in the United States. They have no idea.
Right. It's interesting. I don't know a whole lot about it, but my understanding is that there are some older organizations that were also decentralized. Um, Earth Liberation Front, ALF, Animal Liberation Front, and I think they still exist, though they don't have the kind of movement that they used to have, as far as I know. But again, I will claim ignorance if that is not the case. My understanding is that the FBI was able to at least weaken them. Is there any reason why we can't use those same methods if you're familiar with them or some of the things that we did with previous groups that were also decentralized?
So I'm not familiar with exactly what they did in the past, but to be quite frank, I would be shocked if there were people in government paying attention to most of the groups that I pay attention to. And the reason I say this is again, it's like if they were actually paying attention, that should have been reflected in Trump's executive orders around Antifa.
Mhm,
And it just wasn't. Like there was like I was really looking for any like seed that I could like really grab onto to say, okay, Trump gets this. He doesn't get it. The FBI, I don't think, gets it. I don't think the Department of Justice gets it. And one of the reasons I say this, by the way, is literally the day before Charlie Kirk died. I'm going to tell you a little story.
mhm.
The day before Charlie Kirk died, I had outed a Texas State University professor for basically being a communist and calling for the overthrow of the government. I got him on video doing this, and I was trying to get him fired. And I was sending this video to everyone I could think of saying, there's a communist teaching at Texas State University Republicans that is openly calling for the overthrow of the government. You would think this would be something that they would care about. I sent this video to Harmeet Dillon, who is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. And I said, Harmeet, do you guys want to do something about this, please? And Harmeet Dillon criticized my use of capital letters and flat out told me she wasn't going to do anything about it because she was more concerned about my use of capital letters than she was about communists teaching in colleges. And by the way, Harmeet Dillon is the person that's in charge of getting DEI out of colleges, and she doesn't seem to understand that DEI comes from the communists teaching in the colleges. And so like this is the type of experience I have with the Trump administration where I have tried to get them to pay attention to this stuff. I actually have. There are people in the Trump administration who know exactly who I am and they haven't listened. And I just have no hope that they're actually waking up. So I don't know. I would love for the Trump administration to take this more seriously. I just don't think they are right now.
Gotcha. So you you infiltrated, if you will, and you go to their meetings, you pay attention, right? And I don't want to downplay that, but it
Mhm.
seems like something that can be done fairly easily, right? Like, in other words,
Mhm.
it's not like you're sneaking in, you have to do, all kind of crazy makeup, at least that's my understanding, right? You just a regular person, you go in, you sit down, you listen, you take notes, you walk back and you're like, "Here are my notes." Seems like anybody could do that. Why is it the case that they don't seem to be doing that? Or whatever they need to do because the government has more resources than you or I do.
I think it's a great question, and it is a little bit more complicated than that. I will say I have to wear a disguise because I'm a
Oh, okay.
public person on the internet, so I have to do things to my hair. I have to make myself look different. I usually will wear a chest binder or something like that. I try to make myself look very non-binary when I'm in those spaces, but so it is a little bit more complicated. But it's also more complicated because you do actually have to speak the language of the left in order to understand what they're talking about. And I've just been I've been immersed in their culture for so long. Like I am fluent in their language. They speak a different dialect than we do. It's one that kind of came about in academia where it's very flowery. They use different definitions for the words. And so you're not going to be effective going into far left spaces if you are not fluent in their language. And I would quite frankly be shocked if there was anyone, and I mean anyone in the FBI or the entire Department of Justice that was actually fluent in their language and understood what they were talking about. So if you go into those spaces and you don't speak their language, a lot of it's going to go like this, or you're just going to sit there being really bored the whole time because you're not able to pinpoint what are the important parts. So I think that that's part of it. Um, I also think, and listen, the FBI should be figuring this out, by the way, but I will say it's not quite as easy as just going and showing up and sitting there and listening. There is like, you have to train yourself to be in those types of environments so you can keep a straight face. They should be able to do this. There is definitely like a spiritual cost, for lack of a better term, of being around that type of thing for a long time. So it is actually like I've gone to events that are like multi day events. I feel like my body's been taken over by a demon by the end of those events. Like it is actually very hard to do. So, I think that the FBI should be able to figure this stuff out, but I don't think that they have so far. Insofar as like normal people doing it, I have people in my community that do it, but again, like the people in my community that do it, they learn to speak the language, they're mentally prepared for it, and so anyone can do this, but it takes a little work.
Gotcha, and I didn't mean to downplay any of your
Yeah,
work.
I know.
I'm ignorant of it, so
Totally.
I don't know what's involved in that. So the right doesn't really understand the left, and look, even what little I know, I can see that they don't really understand the left, the far left, any of that. I think it's pretty clear to me, and I don't consider myself in any way, shape, or form somebody that really knows what I'm talking about. Okay,
Mhm.
I can make some small short term commentary, and that's about it. And then I can see that the right doesn't really understand. But let's flip the tables. Do these organizations, the people in these radical left cells and whatnot, do they understand the right?
That's a great question, and the answer is they don't actually care about the right. They
Hmm,
don't actually see the right to be a threat. They actually talk way people get surprised when I say this. When I'm in leftist environments, they complain way more about the Democrats and the liberals than they do about the conservatives.
hmm,
People might be surprised about that, but it's kind of like you have to think about it. The left is so focused on what they're doing and the vision they have for the world, where it's kind of like the conservatives are like an annoyance. It's like, get away. It's like a fly flying around your head, like, get away. It's like one of those. That's about as much attention as they pay to it. Do I think that they understand the right when I sometimes they do presentations talking about the evils of the far right or whatever? They're pretty unhinged. Like it's kind of like a lot of made up stuff. They complain a lot about the Heritage Foundation and stuff like that. And
mhm.
it's just like, oh man, if you only understood the real far right, like you have no idea. So no, I don't think the left understands the right, but I also think that like they're not really concerned about the right. And I also think that we are so far behind where the left is that it kind of is like it does it really matter that they don't understand the right? No, because they're winning and they're winning very like handily.
Right. Other than capturing institutions, how are they winning?
I mean, I think capturing institutions is a very big part of it. I mean, they've captured the schools. Like
Mhm.
the schools are gone. That there is an indoctrination factory in the schools that's just churning out leftist activists, and I think that that is a problem that we are not going to be able to solve in our lifetimes unless the public schools are completely abolished. And even then, you have to set up like what is the alternative to that, right? And so that is a very big piece of it. They also, I mean, think about it this way. Do you want to know why Trump has not had mass deportations? He controls every lever of government. He controls the presidency, he controls the Senate, he controls the House. Where are the mass deportations?
Right.
The mass deportations, and I know libertarians are mixed on deportations, but just
Mhm.
roll with me for a second.
Sure.
The mass deportations haven't happened because almost immediately upon Trump getting elected, the left was already mobilizing to basically sabotage every effort the Trump administration could make around mass deportations. They've been protesting immigration facilities for months. They put together community groups all over the country where they have these signal chats where they're all communicating with each other if ICE shows up, right? And trying to warn each other. They're doing know your rights trainings at schools. They're using the schools as a sanctuary area where ICE aren't allowed to go into the schools and to arrest people for deportation. And it's like every single step the left has taken over the course of the last several months has directly led to the Trump administration being completely, quite frankly, cock blocked on this idea of mass deportations, all because of their efforts. And that didn't come with any political power. That just came with organizing and willpower.
So what you're saying is whatever they're learning, whatever they're teaching each other is effective.
Yeah.
So what's like, how do we counter that? How do we, like, other than, hey, first you need to know your enemy, which I get,
Hmm.
right? Like what are some, let's take the government. Can the government do anything to counter it? Or are they just helpless because they're refusing to learn more?
I think that they are refusing to learn and they're refusing to listen. And I think they want to use Antifa as a political talking point to go after their political enemies rather than actually solving the problem. Here's what I would do if I was Trump. I would have written into that first executive order around Antifa being a terrorist organization. He needed to define what it means to be an Antifa. Because one of the problems, and I said this from the very beginning, most Antifa organizations are not called Antifa. So you have like Rose City Antifa in Portland, that actually has Antifa in the title, but the vast majority of Antifa organizations do not have Antifa in the title. So how are you even identifying who is a part of Antifa and who isn't? Well, for my money, it's pretty simple. If you show up to an immigration facility or any sort of protest in black bloc, which is the black uniform that they wear with the mask where they're trying to hide their identity, you are deemed to be in Antifa, and therefore you are a terrorist and you will be arrested immediately and thrown in jail. Because the thing of it is, and again, I know that I'm supposed to have libertarian sensibilities and all that, but I'm talking about like, what do I think is required to actually solve this problem? You
Mm,
need to arrest the chief militants and put them in jail so they can stop organizing. That's what's required.
Gotcha. And it's interesting. I imagine that there are probably many means which they use to be disruptive. So the cells are one of them, like many
Mhm.
cells, because there's only so many FBI agents, only so many whatever agents, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the hacker community, but once upon a time you had the 2600 group, and they were concerned about the government infiltrating. So what they would do is they would have their meetings on a Friday night everywhere, all across the United States, with the idea being, hey, the government can't reach, can't get to every one of these groups. So
Mhm.
they're going to have to pick and choose and figure out. And they did other things along that line. They weren't nearly as nefarious necessarily. Um, but I think there are some interesting, ways to get around it. But if you don't know these ways, if you don't know what you're up against, then I assume that it's going to be extremely effective. And they've probably thought of many ways to get around whatever the government's doing. Let me ask you this. So I've got a kind of a theory, and I want you to either poke holes in it or unfortunately tell me that I'm correct. Hopefully,
Okay.
hopefully you tell me, DL, you've been I don't drink anymore. You've been whatever, right? You've been consuming too much water, too much
Mhm.
juice, whatever. All right. So here's my view. I'm going to try to lay it out as quickly as possible. On the left, they tend to be more decentralized, while the right I see is more centralized. They prefer law and order. They like their structure. The left and the right, they both have their radicals. From my perspective, I look at it and say the left, because of this decentralized nature, I think that's one of the reasons why we see like these one-offs, or we see like small pockets of people going out and doing a particular thing, and then maybe everybody else is like, maybe they're not aware of it, maybe they are, but there's not much to link them necessarily because of that decentralized nature. And it allows people to act quite a bit more autonomously, which I don't see necessarily on the right. And then I go from there and I say, because the right prefers more law and order, they prefer more structure. I think that just inherently kind of keeps their radicals kind of at bay for the most part, not entirely, but more so than what we see on the left. Because again, you've got the decentralized nature. And if one cell wants to do something, there's no organization to be held accountable to. So here's my concern. Right now, the right is going bananas. They're punishing anyone and everyone for every little thing, every big thing, right? And I think they're going a little bit overboard. I think they're not being very discerning. I think that's going to further radicalize the left and perhaps radicalize even more people to join these really radical groups, which then might increase the violence because, again, as we kind of already established, they're doing this because they want to overthrow the government, plain and simple. Okay. So at some point, it seems to me that if the left keeps getting out there, keeps doing things, that there is a point for which the radicals on the right say, you know what? We've had enough. And then all hell breaks loose. Where am I wrong on this? Tell me that all of this is
Oh,
fairy tale.
I don't think that the radicals on the right are ever gonna do that, and I say that as someone who I have a lot of friends that are extremely far right. I don't think they're ever gonna do that. I think they're mostly, they're doing Twitter Spaces and they're talking about their ideas and they're on their dissident websites talking about their ideas, but they're actually, like, they're honestly, like, not even that concerned with a lot of this stuff on the left that's going on. They have many other concerns, and actually, most of their concerns are along with, like, the fecklessness of the conservatives and the GOP, and most of them are actually much more pissed off with the right for being unequivocally supportive of Israel than anything else. And actually, the right actually is attacking a lot of its own people just because if they're not Zionist enough and things like that. But I do think there's a lot of value in what you said in terms of like the right operates like a hierarchy, and that is very, very true. I also do think that the right is going overboard and being just kind of crazy in the implementation of their ideas right now, and it's making them look very hypocritical, and it's creating a lot of just like infighting and all this stuff. But I think one of the biggest challenges in regards to the left not operating like a hierarchy and the right operating like a hierarchy, and I see this every day, it is almost impossible for right wingers to wrap their heads around the idea that the left does not have a hierarchy. And this is a problem because I see this in my comments all the time. They're like, Karlyn, who's funding them? Mutual aid. No, but who's funding them? Mutual aid. No, but really, who's funding them? It's like they cannot wrap their heads around the idea that the funding for the left is not coming from some George Soros figure or USAID figure. It is completely out of their realm of comprehension. And it's like you will not understand the left until you understand that hierarchy to them is a form of oppression. It goes against everything they believe in. They believe capitalism creates all hierarchies, the haves and the have-nots,
Mhm.
and hierarchy creates all oppression. So it's like they have built up a completely non-hierarchical system, and the right just doesn't understand it at all. You are also correct in that the left is only getting emboldened on this. In fact, Antifa was publishing on their primary website that they publish to, it's called Crime Think. They were publishing basically a response to Trump declaring them terrorists. And
Mhm.
they said flat out, we're going to do more direct action as a part of this. We're not going to do less because they don't actually think that Trump's going to do anything to them. And so they're actually going to go out and be doing more and being more emboldened as a result of all of this.
Gotcha. And so, okay, so you kind of made me feel a little bit better
Hmm.
because now my hypothetical, because what I was concerned about is I was like, I know all these people talk about civil war, and I don't believe them because I once upon a time ran the streets and I hung out with unsavory people. And my general rule of thumb is the louder and the more someone talks about how tough they are and what they're going to do, the less likely they're actually going to do it. There's a few exceptions. I've met a few people that they will run their mouth and then they will engage exactly as they said they would. But those
Mhm.
people are very few. So I don't believe them when they say that, they're prepared for civil war. We can have it. I think that's all a bunch of talk. However, what always had me concerned is like there's a lot more guns, I think, on the right. Like, and at least what it seems like they do more training, or at least they're more open about it, so it maybe feels that way. Do you see it that way, or do you think that there's equally enough guns on the left to be a problem?
I don't know if there's an equal amount of guns on the left as the right, but there are absolutely guns on the left. They've been stockpiling guns and doing like they have their own rifle. There's something called the Socialist Rifle Association. There's the John Brown Gun Club. There's like all these different gun organizations on the left where it would be a mistake to assume that they don't have guns. But the bigger problem is, and you know what, this is something I rag on conservatives about all the time. Conservatives are lazy. And I've been involved in conservative like political circles for a long time now. Conservatives don't leave their houses to organize. They don't leave their houses to go to anything other than a Trump rally. And so it's kind of like, I'm like, do I really believe that conservatives are going to go out and fight the next civil war? No, I don't. I think they're going to. I think they're going to. I see this in the comments on my channel all the time. They're like, I would love the left to give me an opportunity to use my gun. I'm like, you're not getting off the couch, bro. There's a football game on. Let's just be realistic here for a
Right.
second. So no, I don't see that happening as the Civil War. I think the Civil War is going to be the radical revolutionary socialists versus the federal government. I don't think it's going to be this red versus blue thing.
Do you think it could happen before the end of Trump's term?
No, but maybe because like so the left doesn't really know when it's going to happen. They're trying to build up to a pre-revolutionary crisis and they're trying to light the spark of a revolution. I personally think it's going to be in the next 10 to 15 years, but there is a strategy for a mass general strike that is supposed to take place starting May 1st, 2028. So it'll be the last year of Trump's presidency. And the left is building up to this now. And what they're doing, and I actually have 3 weeks worth of DSA SALT trainings on this. What they're doing is basically the DSA, but there are other groups on the left that are doing this too, is trying to get their members into jobs and organizations to get them to agitate to create unions, or if a union already exists in the organization, they're trying to make the union stronger and getting more people involved in it and all that stuff. They use the unions to do far left political activism where they're not only pushing for things like raises and stuff like that, but they're doing political education and trying to radicalize more people to the far left. What this is building up to is they are targeting key sectors to include Amazon, Starbucks, grocery stores, airlines, Delta Airlines in particular, education, and auto workers. And they want unions across all of those industries to all go on strike at exactly the same time in 2028. And I think that what they're trying to do is basically spark the revolution. They're trying to cripple the economy. They want the entire economy to shut down, but I think that they want to start the mass proletarian uprising. So could it be in 2028? Maybe. I don't know.
Is it possible that the Trump policies could lay cover for it so that it looks like a normal response to people like, say, maybe not me, but people that aren't as aware, that are aware even less than I am. For them, would it just look like, oh man, these people are just striking because they don't like, these policies? Or is it going to at some point be obvious to even, the most ignorant person?
I don't know, man. I think it all depends on what Trump does about the economy. Like, if Trump starts to get the economy under control and people start getting a little bit of breathing room, I think it would be less obvious. But I think also, like, if people are struggling financially, people are going to be looking for someone to blame and they're going to be looking for someone to fix their problems, right? And I think that if the economy, if a lot of people are struggling, it's going to be easier for the left to win.
Gotcha. Do the Mamdanis of the world play any role indirectly or directly in helping this overthrow at all, like in any way?
Not the overthrow in particular, because, okay, so there's a difference between the Democratic Socialists of America and Radical Revolutionary Socialists.
Mhm.
Democratic Socialists of America are more reformists. They believe in working within the electoral system to make small incremental changes over time. They still do want a post-capitalist world, but they're not going in to try to overthrow the government. The danger with things like the DSA, and this is especially true in New York City, and this is why Zoran Mandami is going to be the next mayor of New York City. The DSA has a massive electoral network now. They have an electoral machine in New York. And so I think that the Democratic Socialists of America are basically going to own New York City for the foreseeable future. So we're going to get a nice little conservative, or excuse me, communist experiment right in front of us. And we're going to see how this goes. Basically, what people don't know is why Zoran Mandami won that nomination in the first place. He had 30,000 individual volunteers in New York City
Wow.
working for him. And they were all, these are active volunteers. He probably has well over 50,000 people now. He got over 20,000 individual donations. As a comparison, Andrew Cuomo in the primary got 2,700 individual donations. Zoran Mandami got over 20,000. They made over 1 million phone calls. They knocked on over 1 million doors. They were targeting people who had never voted in elections before, like people at Moss. They were politicizing Palestine because the Democrats don't want to touch Palestine with like a 10-foot pole. They were doing everything right. And that is why he won that nomination. And I think it's one of those things where it's like Like you've been in politics, you know this. You cannot compete with an army of 30,000 active
Right.
volunteers. That's almost impossible.
Right. Wow, that's pretty wild. So, what is your best case scenario and how this all plays out, and what is your worst case scenario?
I don't even know about it, but I mean, the best case scenario is Trump removes his head from his ass, pardon my language,
Mhm.
and he starts actually arresting Antifa. And when I say Antifa, I don't mean just anyone on the left that he doesn't like. I mean actual black bloc Antifa. They need to go to jail. And the reason I say this is, first of all, they're just provably committing crimes. I can't tell you how much Antifa propaganda I have sitting in my office that tells me how to do illegal things. They teach me how to take over buildings, how to disconnect closed circuit televisions, how to properly use a crowbar or a set of wire cutters. Like I have so much of their propaganda that they're talking about how do you escape from being arrested? How do you survive a felony trial, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like if we can't get these people on some sort of crime, I just don't know what we're even doing because they're writing about what they're doing overtly on a website, right? They're talking about attacking ICE facilities. They're talking about burning down ICE facilities, like literally burning them down. They're openly declaring war on everything. So Trump needs to arrest them. He needs to put them in jail because when they are in jail, they can't organize with each other. And that's when we can start to get a little bit of like breathing room in the entire situation. That's my best case scenario. Worst case scenario, we continue going as we're going, and more people get radicalized to the far left, and they end up overthrowing the government, and we all end up in the Marxist utopia, and then we all starve.
Hmm.
So fun.
Okay. Well, I guess keep your beans handy, everybody. You
Mhm.
might need them. So, wow, that is so fascinating as well and wild. All right. I'm not me. I'm not DL that's listened to some of your stuff. I'm not DL that's, read maybe a few books and has a little bit of knowledge. I'm just your regular everyday person that likes to listen to some podcasts from time to time. And
Hmm.
maybe I believe in freedom and I like that football game that I'm going to sit down and watch and not do anything. What advice do you have for those people to kind of that would go toward disrupting this future, whether it's the good one or the bad one?
Yeah. I would say, listen, man, I want you to be able to sit around and watch a football game. I would love to be able to sit around and knit and watch movies about like royal people and not even think about anything political. I want us to have a world in which we can do those things. What people need to understand though is that there are people in the world that are trying to ruin this for all of us. And I'm not saying you have to dedicate your entire life to studying the far left like I do because I am an insane person and socialism has driven me to that point.
Mhm.
But we do need to take this seriously. If you want to maintain your way of life in this country, you need to defend it. And I think that we are reaching an inflection point in this society where we have had this massive problem of the far left brewing for 100 years. This is not a new problem. This is not a problem that came about during Obama. This is not a problem that came about even during Trump's first presidency. This has been a problem that's been brewing for 100 years. And the
Mhm.
reason it is so bad is because we have allowed it to get this bad. And so if you want to be able to sit around and watch that football game, you need to maybe take some time out to focus on fixing the problem. Otherwise, the problem's going to consume you and it's going to take away everything you love.
Gotcha. Um, what have I missed to ask you in this question? Is there any question that you were expecting me to ask, or that you're like, man, I wish he would, he should have asked that, or I got to let people know about this? Is there anything that I've missed?
I will say to people, listen, I know that I've seen some messages in the chat. I know that I'm not everyone's cup of tea.
Mhm.
And I know I can be a little bit abrasive and stuff like that. And some people don't like my tone and my attitude. But what I would say to people is that I may not be your cup of tea. I may not be your favorite person in the world, but that should not stop you from looking at the primary source evidence. And if you don't like me, just go to their websites and look at the primary source evidence. Look at Haymarket Books. Look at Red May. Look at the Revolutionary Communists of America. Look at the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Read Crime Think. Read their zines. Go on the Anarchist Library and read what these people are writing. You don't have to like me to hinge into reality with what the far left is doing. And that is actually what's important right now. And we've got to start getting us putting these like petty personality and like, just personal issues aside and focus on the real problem. And so that's what I would say. But I think this has been a great interview. And I really appreciated a lot of the questions you asked, and I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And I thank you so much. Now, I'm going to make a great, big, huge apology here to your audience. Um, Please, I like to go through the comments and like puts them up on the screen and maybe talk about them or ask them. But honestly, I have never had this many comments in my life. I'm a far smaller channel. Before it even started, I just saw it zipping through and I was like, oh Lord, what am I getting into? So to everybody that's out there in the chat, like my channel is smaller and it does not have like super chats, so we don't have to worry about that. But if you had something that you were hoping that I was going to put up on the screen, please accept my most humble apology. I'm a bit overwhelmed and I wanted to make sure to ask what I hope were some of the best questions that I could ask so that when people watch this, they walk away informed. So I appreciate everybody being in there. It's just going crazy. And I'm like, I'll never keep up with that. So too many buttons, too many things going on, but I do appreciate it. And I appreciate you being on the show and taking time out. I know that you're pumping out content left and right. Folks, be sure the show notes, they're there. You can go down and you can find links to her Substack. You can go to her website. I think I have a link directly to your channel. If not, I'll make sure to add that in there. But go there, support her work, watch some of that stuff. Don't ask any, goofy questions, read the room a little bit, pay attention. But otherwise, go learn and hopefully we can push back this threat so that we can all enjoy living our life the way we're supposed to be able to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just end the stream. And then thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Hope you learned a lot. Thank you and good night.